The ache was a familiar tenant in Alara's chest, a resident so long-standing it no longer paid rent. It had taken up residence 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days ago, the first time she had watched Lena cry over a boy who was not worthy of the saltwater jewels that traced paths down her cheeks. Tonight, that boy was Mark, but the name was interchangeable. The ache, however, was constant. It was a dull, thrumming thing that lived just beneath her ribs, a quiet companion to the frantic, hopeful hummingbird of her heart. They were curled on opposite ends of their worn velvet sofa, a piece of furniture that had witnessed more of Alara's silent suffering than any confessor. The lamp in the corner cast a soft, honeyed glow over the room, turning Lena's hair into a halo of spun gold and deepening the shadows under her eyes. She was talking, her voice a low, wounded murmur that snagged on the edges of her sentences. He doesn't listen, you know? Lena's fingers worried the frayed edge of a cushion, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the middle distance. It's like I'm speaking a language he can't be bothered to learn. I talk about wanting to travel, about maybe taking that pottery class, and he just nods and says, "That's nice, babe," while scrolling through his phone. Alara nodded, a slow, measured movement. She made a soft, sympathetic sound in the back of her throat. This was her role. She was the supportive friend, the steady rock, the keeper of secrets, and the mender of heartbreaks. It was a role she had perfected, a mask she had sculpted with such care that she sometimes forgot the shape of her own face beneath it. Inside, the knife of Lena's casual pain twisted in her own heart. Every complaint about Mark was a validation of what Alara already knew, that he was wrong for her, but it was also a reminder of the vast, unbridgeable chasm that separated best friend from everything. "I feel like I'm playing a part," Lena continued, her voice cracking. "The supportive girlfriend. The cool, low-maintenance girl. But it's exhausting, Elle. It's so exhausting trying to be a version of myself that someone else will find acceptable." "I find you acceptable," Alara wanted to scream. "I find you magnificent. I would learn your language until I was fluent. I would build you a pottery studio with my own 2 hands if it would make you smile." Instead, she said, "You shouldn't have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's life." Lena, the words were textbook friendship advice, smooth and practiced and utterly devoid of the screaming desperation that clawed at her insides. Lena finally looked at her, her brilliant green eyes, flecked with gold, shimmering with unshed tears. The directness of her gaze was like a physical blow, and Alara had to fight the urge to look away. In Lena's eyes, she saw her own reflection, the concerned friend, nodding sagely. A ghost in her own life story. "I know," Lena whispered, and the sound was so fragile Alara feared it might shatter on the air between them. "So why does it feel so impossible to leave?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one Alara asked herself every single morning when she woke up and remembered that Lena's bedroom was just down the hall and that Lena's heart belonged to someone else. Why was it so impossible to leave this state of quiet agony? Because the alternative, a life without Lena in it at all, was a void too terrifying to contemplate. Losing the hope of more was dreadful, but losing the certainty of her presence was unthinkable. "Because it's familiar," Alara offered, her voice softer than she intended. "And because you love him," the last 2 words felt like swallowing glass. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping back to the cushion. "Do I?" she asked the threads. "Or do I just love the idea of not being alone?" The honesty of the question hung in the air, heavy and ripe with unspoken things. It was a question Alara couldn't answer, not without betraying the frantic, pleading hope that lived in her chest. So she stayed silent, letting the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic fill the space. She was a master of silence. She had learned that it was safer to say nothing than to risk one word, one syllable, that might give her away. The ache pulsed, a dull and steady rhythm. Thump-thump, thump-thump. A heart beating for a girl who was listening for a different drum entirely. Alara watched as a single tear escaped Lena's eye and traced a glittering path toward her jaw. Every instinct in her body screamed to move, to cross the space between them, to wipe that tear away with her thumb and never let go. She stayed perfectly still. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she did it every single day. This was their stasis, a carefully choreographed dance of proximity and distance. Alara was the sun, silently pouring out warmth, and Lena was the planet, orbiting her for comfort while her gaze was fixed on a different star. Alara knew, with a certainty that was both a comfort and a curse, that this orbit was all she would ever have. It had to be enough. It was never enough. The shift, when it came, was not a gentle tremor, but a seismic jolt that ripped through the foundations of their carefully constructed world. It arrived on a Tuesday, a day of no particular significance, under a sky the color of slate. Alara was in the kitchen, attempting to decipher a recipe for a ridiculously complex soup, when her phone buzzed with a string of frantic, misspelled texts from Lena. "It's over. Rarely over this time. Coming home." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She turned off the stove, the scent of half-sautéed onions filling the air, and waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She paced the length of their small living room, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, a fierce, protective anger at Mark for hurting Lena again, a selfish, shameful spark of hope that this time it was real, and an overwhelming wave of dread for the pain she knew Lena was about to bring through the door. When the key finally scraped in the lock, Alara froze. The door swung open to reveal Lena, looking like a ship wrecked by a storm. Her mascara was a smudged disaster, her hair was a tangled mess, and she was clutching her work bag to her chest like a life raft. Her face was pale and blotchy, her beautiful eyes swollen and red-rimmed. She looked utterly broken. The sight of her shattered Alara's composure. The selfish spark of hope died instantly, extinguished by a flood of pure, unadulterated empathy. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, her own anxieties dissolving in the face of Lena's raw pain. "Lena," she breathed, her hands hovering, unsure of where to land. Lena didn't say a word. She just dropped her bag, the contents spilling across the floor, and collapsed into Alara's arms. The force of it nearly sent them both toppling over. Lena buried her face in the crook of Alara's neck, and her body began to shake with silent, racking sobs. Alara's arms came up instinctively, wrapping around Lena's trembling frame, holding her tight. She held her as if she could absorb the pain, as if her own steady heartbeat could somehow soothe the frantic, terrified rhythm of Lena's. She murmured soft, nonsensical things into her hair, words of comfort that felt flimsy and inadequate against the sheer force of Lena's grief. They stood there for a long time, locked in an embrace in the middle of their entryway, while the forgotten onions began to smoke on the stove. Alara was dimly aware of the smell, of the spilled lipstick and papers at their feet, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the warm, shaking weight of Lena in her arms. It was a torturous kind of heaven. She was finally holding the woman she loved, but it was a hug born of agony, not affection. Eventually, the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. Lena's grip on Alara's shirt loosened, but she didn't pull away. She just rested there, her breath warm and damp against Alara's skin. The electricity of the contact was a physical shock, a current that ran straight to the core of Alara's being. I can't be alone tonight," Lena whispered, her voice thick and muffled against Alara's shoulder. "You're not," Alara promised, her own voice hoarse. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Lena pulled back then, just enough to look at her. Her face was a mess, but to Alara, she had never been more beautiful. There was a raw vulnerability in her eyes that stole Alara's breath. The carefully constructed walls were gone, and all that was left was the aching, terrified heart of the woman Alara adored. "No, I mean," Lena swallowed, her gaze flickering around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Her eyes landed on her own bedroom door, and a fresh wave of despair washed over her features. "I can't sleep in there. Everything in there is him. Us." Alara's heart twisted in sympathy. She understood. "You can have my room," she offered immediately. "I'll take the couch. It's no problem." Lena shook her head, a small, desperate movement. Her eyes, glistening with fresh tears, met Alara's again. And then she asked the question that tilted the world on its axis. Can I stay with you? In your room? Just for tonight. I don't want to be by myself. The request was a stone dropped into the still pool of Alara's carefully managed existence. The ripples spread outwards, disrupting everything. It was a plea born of desperation, a request for comfort from a friend. Alara knew that. She understood that. But the hummingbird in her chest, the one she kept so carefully caged, beat its wings into a frantic, impossible frenzy. To sleep in the same bed as Lena. To lie beside her in the dark, breathing the same air. It was a fantasy so potent, so deeply buried, that the thought of it actually happening made her feel dizzy. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It was a match held to the fuse of her self-control. She looked at Lena's pleading, shattered face. How could she possibly say no? Of course, Alara heard herself say, the words feeling like they were spoken by someone else, someone far braver than she was. Of course you can. That night, the geography of their friendship was redrawn. Alara's small double bed, which had always felt spacious, suddenly seemed impossibly tiny. Lena, showered and changed into a pair of Alara's old, soft pajamas, slid under the covers, her movements hesitant and small. She kept to the very edge of the mattress, a sliver of a person trying to take up as little space as possible. Alara turned off the light, plunging the room into a soft darkness broken only by the sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds. She lay on her own side, her body rigid, every nerve ending hyper-aware of the woman breathing just inches away. The air was thick with the scent of Lena's shampoo, something floral and sweet, like jasmine, and the clean, warm smell of her skin. It was intoxicating. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft rustle of the duvet and the quiet, rhythmic pattern of their breathing. Alara's was shallow and tight in her chest. Lena's was still hitched with the aftershocks of her tears. Lena's voice was a small, fragile thing in the dark. Yeah. Alara's own voice was a croak. She cleared her throat. I'm here. Thank you, Lena whispered. For this. For everything. You don't have to thank me, Alara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That's what friends are for. The word friends felt like a lie, a costume that was suddenly 2 sizes too small. Another silence stretched between them. Alara could feel the heat radiating from Lena's body, a warmth that called to the cold, lonely parts of her soul. She imagined reaching out, imagined her fingers brushing against Lena's arm. The thought was so vivid, so terrifyingly real, that her hand actually twitched under the covers. Then, Lena shifted. She rolled onto her side, facing Alara. In the dim light, Alara could just make out the silhouette of her face, the gentle curve of her cheek, the dark sweep of her lashes. Can I ask you something stupid? Lena asked, her voice barely audible. There are no stupid questions at 3 in the morning, Alara replied, trying for a lightness she did not feel. Lena was quiet for a beat, as if gathering her courage. What is love supposed to feel like? Real love, I mean. Not the movie version. What does it actually feel like? The question punched the air from Alara's lungs. It was a philosophical query, a post-breakup rumination. It was not about her. It couldn't be. And yet, her heart seized, because she knew the answer. She was living the answer. It feels like this, she wanted to say. It feels like my entire universe has condensed into this small, dark room. It feels like I can't breathe when you're hurting. It feels like I would trade every sunrise for 1 more minute of you sleeping safely beside me. It's a quiet, constant ache and a brilliant, blinding light all at once. She had to choose her words carefully. One misstep, and the whole fragile structure would come crashing down. I think, she began, her voice a low murmur, I think it's supposed to feel safe. Like coming home. It's not about grand gestures and dramatic fights. It's the quiet moments. It's knowing that someone sees all of you, the messy parts and the great parts, and chooses to stay. It's a quiet partnership. She could feel Lena absorbing her words, could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Safe, Lena repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Mark never felt safe. He felt exciting. And then he felt like a test. A test I was always failing. A small, involuntary sound of anger escaped Alara's lips before she could stop it. You weren't failing, Lena. He just wasn't the right test. There was a rustle of movement, and then Alara felt it. The gentle, hesitant pressure of Lena's hand covering her own over the duvet. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure, unadulterated lightning shot up Alara's arm, straight to her heart. Her breath hitched. Lena's fingers were cool, her touch featherlight. She didn't intertwine their fingers, just rested her hand there, a simple, profound gesture of connection. You always know the right thing to say, Lena whispered. Her thumb brushed once, gently, over Alara's knuckles. Alara's mind went completely blank. Every carefully constructed thought, every practiced line of supportive friendship, evaporated in the face of that simple, devastating touch. All that was left was the raw, overwhelming truth of her feelings. She couldn't speak. She could only lie there, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest, her hand burning where Lena's was touching it. The world had shrunk to the space of a single mattress, to the few inches of air between their faces, to the single point of contact between their hands. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, Lena's breathing evened out, deepening into the soft, rhythmic cadence of sleep. Her hand remained on Alara's. Alara lay awake for the rest of the night, a sentinel in the dark. She watched the moonlight creep across the floorboards, listening to the soft sounds of Lena's sleep. She was terrified. And she was hopelessly, incandescently happy. A single night of shared comfort had become something more, something fragile and new and terrifyingly precious. The ground beneath her feet had crumbled away, and she had no idea where she was going to land. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality. Lena did not move back into her own room. The first night bled into a second, and then a third, under the unspoken pretense of comfort. The excuse wore thin, but neither of them mentioned it. Lena's presence in Alara's bed became a new, unacknowledged normal. They were two celestial bodies that had broken from their prescribed orbits, now circling each other in a new, tentative dance. The physical intimacy escalated in tiny, almost imperceptible increments. It started with Lena's hand finding Alara's in the dark of the bedroom, their fingers lacing together as they fell asleep. Then, one morning, Alara woke up to find Lena's arm draped over her waist, her face tucked into the space between Alara's shoulder blades. Alara had lain perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, memorizing the gentle weight of Lena's arm, the warmth of her breath against her skin. It felt like a benediction. Their conversations, too, delved into new territory. They happened late at night, propped up against pillows, the room lit only by the glow of a string of fairy lights Alara had hung over her headboard. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood dreams, fears for the future, the strange and winding paths that had led them to this apartment, this room, this bed. One night, Lena turned to her, her expression serious in the soft light. Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like there's a script for how your life is supposed to go, and you're just reading the lines? Alara's heart gave a painful lurch. She knew that feeling intimately. All the time, she admitted, her voice quiet. With Mark, Lena said, her gaze distant, it was like I was playing the girlfriend. I did the girlfriend things. I met his parents, I went to his boring work dinners, I pretended to like his friends. I was good at it. But it never felt real. It felt like a costume. She looked at Alara, her eyes searching. With you, I don't feel like I'm wearing a costume. The sincerity in her voice was a sweet, sharp pain in Alara's chest. Me neither, she wanted to say. For the first time in years, I feel like I might be able to take the mask off. Instead, she just smiled, a small, fragile thing. I'm glad. The moments of realization began to accumulate, little flashes of lightning that illuminated the changing landscape between them. Alara started noticing things. The way Lena's eyes would soften when Alara laughed at one of her stupid jokes. The way Lena would find excuses to touch her, a hand on her arm to get her attention, fingers brushing her back as she passed in the narrow hallway, a playful nudge with her knee when they sat on the couch. The couch had become their daytime space, the bed their nighttime sanctuary. One afternoon, they were watching a movie, a mindless romantic comedy. Alara was hyper-aware of the fact that Lena's leg was pressed against hers, from thigh to ankle. The warmth was a constant, distracting hum against her skin. During a particularly cheesy scene, Alara glanced over at Lena to make a sarcastic comment. But Lena wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Alara. Her expression was unguarded, a mixture of curiosity and a deep, unnerving tenderness. As Alara's eyes met hers, Lena's gaze flickered downwards, just for a second, to Alara's lips. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but for Alara, it was like a sonic boom. The world went silent. Her heart stopped. Lena's eyes snapped back up to meet hers, and a faint blush crept up her neck. She looked away quickly, turning her attention back to the television, her posture suddenly a little stiffer. "This movie is so predictable," she said, her voice a little too loud. But the moment had happened. It was real. It wasn't a product of Alara's hopeful imagination. Lena had looked at her lips. Hope, that treacherous, beautiful beast, began to unfurl its wings in Alara's chest. It was terrifying. For 2 years, her love had been a secret, a static thing she could manage, contain. But now it was changing, interacting with this new, uncertain energy from Lena. It was becoming a living, breathing thing, and it was getting too big to hide. The aha moment for Lena seemed to come in pieces, like a mosaic being slowly assembled. She started asking questions, strange and hypothetical, that seemed to come out of nowhere. They were making dinner one evening, the kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and basil. Lena was chopping tomatoes, her movements methodical. "Hey, Elle," she said, not looking up. Random question. "Shoot. Have you ever, kissed a girl?" Alara's knife stilled over a clove of garlic. Her blood turned to ice, then to fire. She kept her eyes fixed on the cutting board, her knuckles white on the handle of the knife. The question was a landmine. "No," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She had kissed girls before, in college, fleeting and experimental encounters that had been pleasant, but had never felt like a key turning in a lock. Not like she imagined kissing Lena would feel. But admitting that now felt too dangerous, too leading. "Oh," Lena said. A small, quiet sound. "Me neither." Alara risked a glance at her. Lena was still staring at the tomatoes, but her knife was still, too. There was a thoughtful, almost wistful expression on her face. "I wonder what it would be like," Lena murmured, almost to herself. The air in the kitchen crackled with unspoken words. Alara's mind raced. Was this a test? A hypothetical musing? Or was it an invitation? The ambiguity was excruciating. She wanted to scream, "Kiss me and find out." She said nothing. She went back to chopping her garlic, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. The silence that followed was louder than any words they could have spoken. The tension between them grew, a living entity in their small apartment. It was in the lingering glances, the hands that brushed and held on for a second too long, the conversations that danced around the edge of a truth neither of them was brave enough to speak. The air became thick with electricity, and Alara felt like she was walking around with her skin turned inside out, every nerve exposed. She started to pull back. It was an act of self-preservation. The hope was becoming too painful, the possibility of misreading everything too catastrophic. If she was wrong, if this was just Lena's way of healing from a breakup, then Alara was setting herself up for a fall that would shatter her into a million pieces. So she started to retreat. She made excuses to be out of the apartment more. She stayed up late in her office, pretending to work, until she was sure Lena was asleep. She'd slip into bed in the dark, leaving a careful foot of space between them. She kept their conversations light, superficial, steering them away from the deep, intimate waters they had been exploring. She was trying to put the ghost costume back on, but it no longer fit. It took Lena less than a week to notice. The confrontation happened on a Thursday night. Alara had just gotten home, her bag heavy with work she didn't need to do, her heart heavy with the strain of her own avoidance. She found Lena sitting on the couch in the dark, the only light coming from the city glow through the window. Hey, Alara said, her voice unnaturally bright. Didn't see you there. I'm just going to grab a shower. She started to move toward the hallway, a quick escape in her sights. Stop, Lena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a steely quality that made Alara freeze in her tracks. Alara turned slowly. She couldn't see Lena's expression clearly in the shadows, but she could feel the intensity of her gaze. What's wrong? Alara asked, her heart starting to pound. That's my question, Lena replied, her voice low and steady. You've been hiding from me for weeks, Alara. You barely look at me. You come to bed after I'm asleep. You're building a wall between us, and I want to know why. The directness of the accusation stripped Alara of all her defenses. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The point of no return had arrived. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, the lie weak and transparent even to her own ears. Lena stood up, a silhouette against the window. She took a step closer. Don't you? We were getting so close. Something was happening between us. And then you just vanished. You're in the same apartment, but you're a million miles away. Did I do something? Did I misread something? You have to talk to me. Her voice cracked on the last few words, and Alara's carefully constructed wall began to crumble. It's not you, Alara whispered, the words aching in her throat. It's me. It's all me. Then what is it? Lena took another step, closing the distance between them until they were only a few feet apart. Alara could see the glint of tears in her eyes now. What aren't you telling me? The question hung in the air, a final, terrifying challenge. Tell her. Tell her and risk everything. The friendship, the easy comfort, this fragile new intimacy. Tell her and risk watching her face change from confusion to pity or worse, to disgust. Or stay silent. Stay silent and let this beautiful, terrifying thing between them wither and die from neglect. Let Lena believe she had done something wrong. Let the ghost costume become a shroud. Alara's fear was a roaring hurricane in her mind, but beneath it, a tiny, steady voice whispered, You owe her the truth. You owe yourself the truth. But before Alara could speak, before she could force the impossible words from her throat, Lena's expression shifted. The frustration and hurt on her face softened into something else, something that looked like dawning, terrifying realization. Oh, Lena breathed, the sound barely a puff of air. It's me, isn't it? I'm the reason you're pulling away. She took the final step, her hands coming up to hover near Alara's arms, not quite touching. I'm the one who's been weird. I'm the one who's been. I don't know what I've been doing. Crossing lines. Leaning on you too much. No, Alara said, the denial sharp and immediate. Lena, no. Yes, Lena insisted, her voice dropping to a raw, trembling whisper. And it's because I don't know what's happening to me, Alara. Ever since I left Mark, no, that's not right. For longer than that. Everything feels different when I'm with you. The whole world just clicks into place. It's quiet. It feels right. And it scares the hell out of me. Alara stood frozen, her entire being focused on Lena's next words. The hurricane in her mind stilled. The world held its breath. Lena's gaze dropped, that same devastating flicker from the couch, but this time it lingered. It traced the line of Alara's jaw, the curve of her throat, and came to rest on her lips. When she looked up again, her eyes were wide with a kind of terrified wonder. I think, Lena's voice was so quiet it was almost swallowed by the darkness. I think I've been thinking about kissing you. The confession landed in the silent room not like a bomb, but like a seed. A tiny, impossible seed that immediately sprouted, its roots breaking through the packed earth of Alara's fear, its stem reaching for the light of Lena's terrified, hopeful face. For a moment, Alara couldn't process the words. They echoed in the hollow spaces of her heart, the place where she had stored 2 years of silent longing. I've been thinking about kissing you. It was the secret password to a door she never believed would open. The shock gave way to a dizzying, terrifying surge of emotion. It was hope and fear and disbelief all tangled together, a knot in her throat that made it impossible to speak. All she could do was stare at Lena, her own eyes filling with the tears she had held back for so long. Lena saw the tears and her face crumpled, misinterpreting Alara's silence as rejection. "Oh God," she whispered, taking a half step back, her hands dropping to her sides. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Elle. I've ruined everything. I knew it. I shouldn't have said that. Just forget I said anything." She turned, ready to flee. "No." The word burst from Alara, raw and desperate. She reached out, her hand closing around Lena's wrist, her touch clumsy but firm. "Lena, wait." Lena stopped, her back still to Alara, her shoulders tense. Alara's heart was a drum against her ribs, loud enough to shake her whole body. The truth was on her tongue, heavy and terrifying and absolutely necessary. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "You've been thinking about it?" Alara's voice was a ragged whisper. "For how long?" "A few weeks." Lena turned around slowly, her face a mask of confusion and misery. I guess. Since the night I came home. I don't know." A single tear finally escaped Alara's eye and traced a hot path down her cheek. A wry, watery smile touched her lips. "You've been thinking about it for a few weeks," she repeated, her voice thick with unshed tears and years of unspoken love. "Lena, I've been thinking about it for 2 years, 4 months, and whatever day it is today." The confession hung between them, absolute and undeniable. Lena's face went slack with shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, searched Alara's, and in them, she must have seen the truth of it. The years of quiet pining, the carefully concealed ache, the unwavering devotion that had been hiding in plain sight all along. 2 years. Lena breathed, the words full of dawning comprehension. It wasn't a question of belief, but of scale. She was trying to grasp the sheer weight of what Alara had just said. Alara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She just held Lena's gaze, letting her see everything. The vulnerability was terrifying, like standing naked in a town square. But there was also a profound sense of relief. The secret was out. The heaviest burden she had ever carried was finally set down. Lena's expression shifted from shock to a deep, heart-wrenching empathy. She saw it all now. The late-night talks, the endless support, the way Alara would look at her when she thought she wasn't paying attention. All of it was recontextualized in a single, blinding flash of understanding. "Oh, Alara," she whispered, and her own eyes welled with tears. Not of pity, but of something else. Something that looked like regret for her own blindness and a profound, overwhelming tenderness. She stepped forward again, closing the last inch of space between them. Her hands came up, not hovering this time, but landing gently on Alara's arms. Her touch was warm, certain. All this time, Lena murmured, her gaze tracing Alara's features as if seeing them for the first time. "You were feeling that, and I was complaining to you about him." Her voice was laced with self-recrimination. "It's okay," Alara whispered, though it hadn't been. "No," Lena said, her grip tightening slightly. "It's not. But I'm here now. I see you now." They stood there, holding each other's gaze, the air crackling with the weight of 2 years of unspoken feelings and a few weeks of dawning, terrifying discovery. The city lights outside painted them in strokes of gold and blue. The world had fallen away. There was only this room, this moment, this precipice. Lena's gaze dropped to Alara's lips again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a clear, unmistakable declaration of intent. Her own lips parted slightly. "Alara," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It wasn't a question, but a statement. A beginning. She began to lean in, her eyes fluttering shut. And just before their lips met, she paused, a fraction of an inch away, her breath a warm caress against Alara's skin. "Can I?" she breathed, the question of final, gentle courtesy. A confirmation. Alara's entire world had narrowed to this single point, this single question. Her answer was not a word, but an action. She closed that last millimeter of space herself. The first touch was impossibly soft. It was a gentle press of lips, hesitant and questioning. It was not a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It tasted of salt from their tears and of a rightness so profound it made Alara's knees feel weak. It was a question and an answer all in one. "Is this real?" Yes. A soft sound escaped Lena's throat, a sigh of relief or wonder, and she deepened the kiss. Her hand moved from Alara's arm to the side of her neck, her thumb stroking the sensitive skin just below her ear. The gentle touch sent a shiver down Alara's spine. Alara's own hands, which had been hanging uselessly at her sides, came up to frame Lena's face. Her fingers tangled in the soft hair at her temples. She tilted her head, and the kiss deepened further, becoming more certain, more urgent. This was no longer a tentative exploration. This was a homecoming. It was 2 years of pent-up longing, of watching from the sidelines, of silent, aching love, pouring out of Alara in a single, desperate rush. It was weeks of confusion and dawning realization and terrifying hope solidifying into certainty for Lena. The kiss was everything. It was gentle and it was hungry. It was the relief of a truth finally spoken and the thrill of a new story just beginning. Alara could feel the slight tremor in Lena's hands, and she knew her own were shaking, too. They were both terrified and brave and completely, utterly lost in the moment. When they finally broke apart, it was not a decision, but a necessity. The need for air was the only thing more pressing than the need for each other. They rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling, their chests rising and fall in ragged unison. Alara kept her eyes closed, trying to imprint the feeling of Lena's lips on hers, the feeling of her hands on her skin, into her memory forever. Oh, Lena breathed out, the word a soft, reverent puff of air. Wow. Alara opened her eyes. Lena's were still closed, a small, wondrous smile playing on her lips. She looked peaceful. More peaceful than Alara had ever seen her. That felt, Lena started, her voice a husky whisper. She opened her eyes, and the green in them was bright, electric. That felt like coming home. Alara's heart, which she thought might burst from sheer emotion, seemed to swell even more. Lena had used her own words, the definition of love she had given her from the darkness of her bed, and she had given them back to her, validated and real and true. A laugh, wet with tears, bubbled up out of Alara's chest. Yeah, she whispered, her smile mirroring Lena's. It did. They stood there for another long moment, wrapped in a cocoon of shared discovery. The immediate aftermath of the kiss was not awkward or uncertain, but filled with a profound sense of rightness. The world had tilted on its axis, and they had landed somewhere new, somewhere that felt more solid and real than anywhere they had been before. But as the initial, dizzying euphoria began to settle, the reality of what had just happened, what it all meant, began to sink in. The implications were vast, a whole new uncharted territory stretching out before them. Lena was the first to voice it. She pulled back slightly, though her hands remained on Alara's face, her thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. Her expression was a mixture of awe and dawning apprehension. "I'm terrified," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The admission was stark and honest in the quiet room. Alara felt a wave of relief. "Good," she breathed out. "Me too." The shared fear was just as intimate as the shared kiss. It was an acknowledgement that this was not a simple, easy thing. This changed everything. Their friendship, their living situation, their entire lives. "What do we do now?" Lena asked, her eyes searching Alara's for an answer she didn't have. "I have no idea," Alara admitted, and for the first time, not having a plan felt okay. She was so used to being the steady one, the one with the advice. But this was new for both of them. "We figure it out? Together." "Together," Lena repeated, the word sounding like a vow. She seemed to like the sound of it. A real smile, bright and genuine, lit up her face. "Okay, I can do together." Then her expression clouded over again, a shadow of the past falling over them. "Mark," she started, the name feeling alien and out of place in their new reality. "He's going to call. He's going to want to talk." Alara's heart gave a familiar pang of jealousy and fear, but she pushed it down. This was part of it. The messy, complicated part. But Lena seemed to read her mind. She shook her head, her gaze firm and resolute. "It doesn't matter. It was over long before tonight. I didn't know why. But now I do." She looked at Alara, and the clarity in her eyes was breathtaking. All those times I complained to you, El, about feeling like something was missing, like he didn't really see me. I was measuring him against you. I was measuring every relationship I've ever had against what I have with you, and they all came up short. I just didn't have the right name for it. I didn't understand what I was looking for. The confession was a balm on the 2 years of wounds Alara had carried. To know that she hadn't just been a background character, a supportive friend, but the standard by which all others were judged, it was a validation so profound it almost made her cry again. You were looking for a partnership, Alara said softly, echoing her own words back to Lena. I was looking for you, Lena corrected her, her voice full of a certainty that swept away all of Alara's remaining doubts. They decided, in a hushed and earnest conversation that lasted late into the night, to take it one day at a time. There were no grand declarations, no promises for forever. There was just a simple, powerful agreement to try. To explore this new, beautiful, terrifying thing that had blossomed between them. That night, when they finally went to Alara's room, it was different. There was no pretense of platonic comfort. Lena slid under the covers and immediately turned to face Alara, her body fitting against hers as if it were made to be there. Alara wrapped her arms around Lena's waist, pulling her close, burying her face in her soft hair that smelled of jasmine. Lena's hand came to rest over Alara's heart, a warm, steady pressure. Is this real? Lena murmured into the pillow. I think so, Alara whispered back, her lips brushing against Lena's temple. It feels real. For the first time in 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days, the ache in Alara's chest was gone. In its place was a warmth that spread through her entire body, a quiet, humming joy that felt like sunlight. She fell asleep holding the woman she loved, not as a friend seeking comfort, but as something new. Something more. Something that felt, impossibly, like a beginning. 3 months later, the world was a different color. The muted grays of Alara's quiet longing had been replaced by a vibrant, saturated palette she hadn't known existed. The change wasn't loud or dramatic, it was in the small, quiet moments that now made up the fabric of her days. It was in the way Lena now kept her toothbrush next to Alara's, a cheerful pink standing beside a sensible blue. It was in the way they fell into a natural rhythm in the kitchen, moving around each other with an easy, practiced grace, their bodies brushing in the small space without apology. It was in the way Alara would wake up in the morning, not to the cold emptiness of her bed, but to the warmth of Lena's body curled around hers, their legs tangled together under the duvet. Mark had called, just as Lena had predicted. Alara had given her space, her heart a tight knot of anxiety as Lena took the call in her own room, a room she now only used for storage and phone calls. Alara couldn't hear the words, only the low, steady murmur of Lena's voice. There was no yelling, no crying. When Lena emerged 20 minutes later, her face was calm, resolute. It's done, she had said simply, crossing the room to where Alara was pretending to read on the couch. She had taken the book from Alara's hands, set it aside, and curled up in her lap, tucking her head under Alara's chin. He gets it. It's really, truly done, and that had been the end of that. The ghost of him had finally, peacefully departed. Their new normal was a quiet, comfortable bliss that Alara was still terrified of jinxing. She would sometimes find herself just watching Lena, a sense of wonder washing over her. She'd watch her laugh at something on her laptop, her whole face lighting up. She'd watch the focused frown she got when she was trying to assemble a new piece of furniture. She'd watch her sleep, her face soft and unguarded in the morning light. In these moments, a wave of gratitude so intense it felt like a physical force would wash over her. This morning was one of those moments. Alara was at the kitchen counter, pouring hot water over coffee grounds in their French press. The apartment was filled with the rich, dark smell of coffee and the soft, golden light of a Sunday morning. She felt a pair of arms slide around her waist from behind, and a soft cheek press against her back. Morning, Lena mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. Morning, Alara replied, her hands continuing their slow, steady pour. She leaned back into the embrace, a comfortable, familiar weight. You're making the good coffee, Lena observed, her voice still sleepy. Is it a special occasion? Alara smiled. It's Sunday. Good answer. Lena's arms tightened around her, and she rested her chin on Alara's shoulder, watching the dark liquid swirl. You know, she said softly, her breath warm against Alara's neck, I used to think love was supposed to be this big, dramatic, complicated thing. A battle you had to fight, a puzzle you had to solve. Alara stopped pouring, letting the press sit. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see Lena's profile, her eyes soft and contemplative as she gazed at their intertwined reflection in the chrome of the coffee maker. And now? Alara prompted gently. Lena turned her head, her lips brushing Alara's cheek. Now I know it's not. It's not a battle at all. She looked into Alara's eyes, her own green ones clear and full of a love that still made Alara's breath catch. It's coming home. The words resonated deep within Alara's soul, a perfect, beautiful echo of their journey. The fear she'd lived with for so long, the ache of unrequited love, felt like a story about someone else, a lifetime ago. All that was left was this quiet kitchen, this golden light, this woman in her arms. She turned fully in Lena's embrace, her hands coming up to cup her face. She looked at the gold flecks in Lena's eyes, at the small, happy smile on her lips, and felt a sense of peace so profound it felt like settling into her own skin for the very first time. Then we're both exactly where we need to be, Alara whispered. She leaned in and kissed her, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted like coffee and sunlight and the beautiful, breathtaking certainty of being completely, and finally, home.